Okay, so this is part of the negative course. And this month's essay that I wrote for this course is on Ouroboros, which initially is supposed to be, the essay itself initially is supposed to be a kind of addition to Drew Dalton work, The Unbecoming of Being and The Matter of Evil, both 2023, but it kind of got out of hand, meaning that not only I used Ouroboros as a symbol for what Drew is talking about, but also added my thing was the mother and love and connection as entropic. So let's see. First, what Drew Dalton is talking about in his work, in those two works, The Matter of Evil and The Unbecoming of Being, is this principle something that Albert Einstein is talking? This quote is stolen from Drew Dalton too. So he puts a lot of attention on this second law of thermodynamics, the second law of thermodynamics that Albert Einstein is talking here. So that's the only known certainty for us today. And Drew Dalton claims that this second law of thermodynamics, that's the only certainty. And it's nearly universal, has nearly universal use in contemporary science. And based on this revolutionary law, we have to equally rethink the whole metaphysics and the whole ontology based on this law, on the second law of thermodynamics, which is the law of entropy. So Dalton suggests a radical revision based on this law, radical revision of the metaphysical orthodoxy, meaning that in conventional metaphysics, the way it's originated and existed, starting from Plato and Aristotle and to the theology, Christian theology, it's that it's initially assumed that there is something ordered, fundamentally ordered, stable, and purposeful at the core of existence and ultimately good. And there is the eternal, unmovable, eternal essence at the core of existence, something that ordering cosmos. And based on this law, if you rethink metaphysics and ontology from perspective of entropy, that's the only certainty we have in science. Well, at least some certainty that we have is that the whole structure of metaphysics changes. It's like the opposite of how it initially meant to be, was this unchangeable good matter at the core of existence that gives purpose and guidance to everything else and ultimately is good. So with the entropy law is rather the opposite. It means that if we imply it to ontology and metaphysics, it means that what exists is the opposite, rather evil, and that everything existing is approaching towards its own dissolution. It's exists within the trajectory of its own undoing, of its own disintegration. And if you reframe metaphysics through this entropic lens, it would mean that everything, all things exist to fall apart. So they don't even exist. Their existence is falling apart, and there is no other essence to the universe and everything, that everything is approaching its decay without any possibility of reversing this law. So everything eventually collapses into nullity, and its existence is unfoldment of this collapse into nullity. Even life, from this perspective, unlike it's normally thought to be something that resists or something opposite to entropy or negentropic, Dalton would claim that from this perspective, it's rather the agent of entropy, its embodiment of entropy. So organisms, they do not resist entropy, but embody it or accelerate it. So from this perspective, life is a form of how decay is embodied. It's not opposite to decay. unfortunately. And it also means that existence as such is suffering. So suffering is how existence is felt. It's actual existence, not the obstacle to the harmonious existence in harmony with universe, because in harmony with universe means through suffering. So suffering is how this unbecoming is felt. And Drew Dalton concludes that this being, what he calls rather unbecoming, unbeing, is what exists, not becoming. And it's not something ordered towards actualization and flourishing, but on the contrary, it's unbecoming, and it's devouring beast, one that consumes itself over and over, digesting all there is until nothing at all remains. And he doesn't talk about Ouroboros, but in this quote especially, it's obvious that it's very fitting here as the symbol of what, of this unbecoming, of this process of universe as suicidal. And so I would talk about Ouroboros, a silly snake, an ancient symbol of a snake that bites its tail, that is devouring itself and exists through this self-devouring or self-harm. And normally this symbol is interpreted as in an opposite way, as a symbol of life, as some kind of self-sufficiency and eternal resurrection, because the snake bites itself, but also through this devouring itself, it exists. So it's kind of seen as the self-renewing, self-sufficient vitality, but I would reinterpret it as the symbol of entropy and as a symbol of suicidal universe and existence as suicide. It's not self-sufficiently, but it's not that the snake feeds on itself and therefore is a symbol of life that is conquering or subordinating death. It is the embodiment of death. It does exist, but it exists as an act of self-harming, as devouring itself, and there is nothing beyond this bite. So from the through the lens of entropic metaphysics, it's not life-affirming loop, but rather the symbol of existence as ultimately act of destroying itself. And it doesn't resist the destruction, the decay, but it rather enacts it, and there's nothing beyond beyond this. So it's, for me, it's the symbol of self-harm as self-undoing, and the symbol of not that much of life, but of the death, the expansion of death. And I would draw something like this. The Ouroboros performs its own death, and it's the symbol of suicidal universe. It stretches, embraces, expands the void. And it's silly because at least we can think of the Ouroboros as silly snake, because strangely, that's my problem, where the comedy ends and tragedy starts. Like, I don't get it. Why the dog who is chasing his tail is funny, and we would laugh at videos with a dog who is chasing its tail, but not this ancient symbol. And I suggest comprehending it as the silly one too, a bit more grotesque, but as pathetic as and as laughable as the silly dog, like cosmic laughter. And based on this comprehension of metaphysics, the entropic comprehension of metaphysics and ontology, we can also say that subject itself, the subjective embodiment, is also Ouroboric and also entropic. So this principle of suicidality, of self-harm as the only thing that exists, can be applied to the existence of a subject. So it's not something abstract. It's something that each of us go through, just existing in our subjective embodiment. And Ouroboros is not metaphor. It's rather how life enacts itself through self-erasure. And with suffering, that it's not an obstacle, but unfortunately something structural to existence. And so I would talk here about the Ouroboric subject, and unfortunately mentioning Lacan again, with his barred subject that sometimes is represented in this way, with the rupture within the empty space in the S, and what Lacan called subject with holes is applicable to this kind of the way of depicting it. So this self-erasing subject for Lacan, once again, the S barred S represents the subject that is created through its own cut, through a void, that is structural, through certain type of structural non-being, and it exists through self-erasure, and it's formed in and by the cut. So this empty space, the bar, erasing it is structural to its existence. And we can say it carries its own erasure, and subject only exists as a rupture. To exist for this subject is to be undone. And this S is fractured into halves, and this fracture, the crack is structural and creates the subject. And it's also possible to talk about this Lacan's that it's represent his schema of psyche. So this object A, which I have troubles getting why is it object if it's not object, but okay, so this object A is not actually object, but it's rather impossible reminder, some kind of fragment that that constitutes the structure, but at the same time cannot be become the part of this structure. So it's the structural wound that at the same time interrupts the illusions of coherence and structures this structure. So it's a placeholder for what cannot be contained. At the same time, it cannot be contained, but it's the point around which the system orbits. So the system needs it, but it cannot integrate it. The structural gap. And similarly, for me, it's interesting to see it, how it's maybe different, maybe similar to Ouroboros, because on one hand, it's similar in a way of there is something in Ouroboros that prevents its being a full circle. There's this moment of bite, and the object A can be seen as this moment of bite, the interruption that is structural and at the same time cannot be, and destructive, cannot be integrated into the system. So object R can be seen as the bite, self-canceling wound at the core of Ouroboros. And we can say that with Ouroboros, the essence is not a loop, but the bite itself. It's not that it's the loop, but rather it's the bite. It's where Ouroboros touches, pierces, consumes itself, is what defines it. And it's the act of this gesture of self-destruction, and is the enactment of its own erasure. So it represents both Ouroboros and this Lacanian structure, the existence as collapse and continuing expansion of this disappearance. So it's disappearance that expands. And in this expansion of disappearance, for me, even better, lots of things are better than Lacan, but beyond here is a great symbol. The letter O is the great symbol to represent this expansion of nothingness, the enactment of erasure. And so letter O in beyond, it's not a letter, it's rather a place, a mark, something that marks the unsymbolizable. And O marks something that cannot be symbolized, cannot be contained or held within the exposure of a letter. So it's the way of maybe embracing and circling the unknowable or the unthinkable, the void itself. So it's not O, it's rather, it's not the containment, it's rather the opposite, the impossibility of containing. It's like self-negating structure. O, therefore, is not a sign, is this bare negative presence, the inscription of what cannot be said or what cannot be contained. It's not the close whole, but it's the negative topology. It's the diagram of what cannot be held. And the Ouroboros might look like both similar to it and different from it. It's well, both are represented as circles, but nonetheless, this circle it seemed to be closed, uninterrupted one. But I would claim that there are more coincidences that this symbol is closer to Ouroboros than it might first appear because of this closeness of it, because it's closed symbol. So Ouroboros is figure of the loop that is devouring itself, the approaching its own destruction. And it can be seen as expanding the whole, the non-existence of itself, the Ouroboros. And in this way, if you see the letter O as embracing the void, this is basically similar to the Ouroboros as a self-destructive loop. And they both represent the undoing, the holding of nothing, or the expansion of nothing. And O, we can see O, the sign, as not the Ouroboros itself, but also as the bite, as Ouroboros' open mouth that is ready to bite itself. So it's something that represents destruction. So this is Ouroboros' open mouth. At the same time, external Ouroboros, the circle, the snake, but also the open mouth of the snake, which symbolizes the destruction, the self-devouring act. So it's kind of interesting from this perspective that it can be seen as Ouroboros from outside and within, and the coincidence of external and internal through the self-erasure, and also as the symbol of expansion or way of embracing the void. And I would also talk about the maternal Ouroboros or entropic love, because since the entropic structure is universal, it's applicable to universe, to the metaphysics, to ontology, to the subjective existence, but also to love and care, and to mother and child dyad, which for me represents the, not only for me, but like I comprehend it as embodiment of this true love or certain form of care. So, and normally the figure of mother and a child, or just mothering a child, is normally seen as embodiment of life, something that resists in opposition to death. But since based on this entropic metaphysics, there is nothing that resists death, just only way of embodying death and destruction, then we can say that this dyad, the maternal care and the dyad of mother and infant, are embodiment of not something that resists death, but we can think of them as embodying death, as I would even claim the central figures of entropy itself, which might sound strange, but nonetheless. And from this perspective, what they embody and what they represent, the care and love, and the just connection. By implication, this can be said about love as such. Love as entropic, or any kind of care, is also entropic, which means it, at the same time, through creating or through attempting to create it, this rather destroys or something like it. And the easiest way to interpret the Ouroboric pregnancy as Ouroboric would be Lacanian logic that we just discussed with this object, that we can say that the circle of pregnancy, the containment of the child, can be seen as something that contradicts itself, like the object R, that is opposite to the container, and at the same time it's contradicts it and structures it. So pregnancy, by analogy, can be seen as the circle, containment, but its essence is rapture because it's approaching the birth, and the birth is the birth is rejecting kind of what it contains. So pregnancy can be seen, or maternal body can be seen as containing, but at the same time, the core of this containing, the embryo, can be seen as the opposite. It contains in order to expel, it holds in order to release. So it's approaching this release. It exists, contains towards rapture, or holds towards losing, or releasing. And it's, well, I have problems with Lacan's applying Lacan's logic to maternal, because Lacanian logic inherently betrays motherhood and hates motherhood. But this one is the easiest one, but it presupposes to interpret it that way. But it presupposes that mother is, and Lacan is talking about mother, this idea of separation. As mother is something that suffocates and needs to be abandoned, and one needs to separate from her, and then complain about her to the analyst all your life. But it can be interpreted, this entropic structure of motherhood, of care, can be interpreted in a different way. It can be seen less than not that much as a logic of rupture, that it's as a logic of suffocating, or the logic of something that needs to be abandoned, motherhood, mother. But within, through comprehending care, or this containment as both holding and dissolving, as the work, or as the work of shared decay. So it's not mother who is killing and we need to escape her. It's like the shared work of death that is happening. And it can be seen in a more tragic way than this Lacanian initial, my interpretation, extending Lacan's thought, because Lacan's thought presupposes that you escape the mother and then you separate it, and you find you resist death, the mother, the suffocation that mother represents here. And this is like hopeful comprehension. And in my reading, it's more tragic, because it would mean this shared work of decay, a shared work of death, that mother and child, and any care by extension, what they embody, what they represent. It's more tragic because there is nowhere you can escape it, because if each act of care at the same time destroys, and there is no perfect care that is not destructive, then there is more tragedy in it. There is nowhere to escape. So it's really actually entropic logic, more entropic logic than the one with the other Lacan's interpretation, which means that if care is entropic, we nurture by wounding, and there is no other way to nurture except for at the same time wounding, or the act of destroying. There is no perfect care. It's not that other types of care, non-maternal care, or some kind of divine care that would sustain life without also destroying it. But this what the tragedy and absurdity and ambiguity of care, that love, that constitutes love as the relation of disappearance. And I would also suggest of thinking of pregnancy, this letter O, the expansion of nothingness, the expansion of void, and the mother as a figure of entropy. So that's more obvious, that she's dissolving into a child, sacrificing her body into a child, like this in Shelley's painting Dead Mother. You can see that. And in a colorful version, the child is more bright and alive, and the mother is more morbid colors, which represents that she's dying into a child, but through this death, she's sacrificing herself to a new life. So child can be seen as the product of mother's death, but it's mother's sacrifice or something like that. But it's still, from if we truly apply the entropic perspective, we won't be able to see child as a triumph of life that conquers mother's death. Child would be seen also as, from this perspective, entropic perspective, when everything is death. So both mothers dying into a child and child is also death. And this is the work of shared undoing, of shared entropy, and of relationship as entropic, or love as entropic relationship. So child can be seen as embodiment or extension of mother self-destruction, the internalized undoing of the mother. And from this perspective, this is what I wrote. What internalized in child is not only nourishment or affection, like we normally think, that we take something from our parents, we take something from our mother, we internalize it, and this is what constitutes us. This is who we are, our life, our positive presence. But we can see it as mother's death or mother's self-destruction internalized, or extension of mother's self-destruction, which we mistaken, which we take for who we are. So kind of negative perspective, instead of taking something and constituting a presence of us out of it, it's rather extending others' self-destruction. So from this more entropic perspective, the child can be seen as the echo of maternal destruction, not the triumph of life, but the extension of death. And here, with this image, so it's not the child that is the triumph of mother's death, sacrificing herself to the child, but the child can be seen as the heart of her dying, as the sacred heart of her death, as extending her death, or the growth of O, of the letter O, expansion of nothingness, of the void into a being. It's extended self-cancellation. And the mother, not only the mother sacrifices herself to a child, and the child is the one who is literally biting you, taking something. So it's this biting Ouroboros. But the child can be seen as the sacred heart of mother's death, as the essence, as, and something that the death that survives her and carries her death forward. So we can see that we can comprehend ourselves from this entropic perspective as extension of our mother's death, instead of as a life that conquered her death, or her death was sacrificed for. Okay, now that's all for me. I will stop recording it and come back to you.